At my ex-wife's vow renewal, her new husband introduced me as the past mistake. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. They had no idea I had a toast of my own prepared. I never imagined a simple cream-colored envelope could make my hands tremble like that. But for 3 solid days, it sat on my granite kitchen island, a silent challenge, until I finally gathered the nerve to open it. My name, Arthur, was elegantly scripted across the front in a flowing, confident hand. Inside, as I'd suspected, was a formal invitation to the vow renewal ceremony for my ex-wife, Roberta, and her new husband, Mark. 10 years of marriage to him. A full 15 to me before that. A quarter-century of Roberta's life, neatly partitioned between 2 men. "Dad, are you actually going?" my son, Leo, asked, leaning against the kitchen door frame. At 22, he had his mother's sharp intellect and my quiet stubbornness. He was aiming for a casual tone, but I could hear the wire of tension humming in his voice. "I don't know, son. It feels awkward, to say the least." Leo let out a sigh. "Mom said it would mean a lot to her, and Mark specifically asked for you to be there." He paused, his gaze shifting. "For us? For me and Maya." My daughter Maya, 2 years younger than Leo, materialized behind him, a silent echo of her brother. "It'll be weirder if you're not there, Dad. Everyone will be wondering where you are." My eyes fell back to the invitation, the heavy cardstock cool beneath my fingers. It advertised a celebration of Roberta and Mark's decade-long marriage at the Oak Ridge Country Club, the exact same venue where Roberta and I had held our wedding reception all those years ago. The coincidence felt like a deliberate jab. Either Mark was completely oblivious, or he simply didn't care. Neither possibility sat well with me. "I'll think about it," I said, the words feeling hollow. But I knew, even then, that I would go. For Leo and Maya, it was always for them. 2 weeks later, I was standing before my bedroom mirror, adjusting the knot on my tie and smoothing the lapels of the navy blue suit I'd bought for the occasion. It was classic and understated. The last thing I wanted was to look like I was trying to compete. My brown hair, now dusted with silver at the temples, was neatly combed. As a small act of personal defiance, I wore the cufflinks my father had given me on my own wedding day. "You look nice, Dad," Leo commented, appearing in the doorway. He was dressed in a sharp tuxedo as one of the groomsmen. Mark had insisted on having him in the wedding party. My daughter Maya was a bridesmaid. "Do I look like I'm trying to upstage the groom?" I asked, the joke only half-hearted. Leo rolled his eyes, a gesture he'd perfected in his teenage years. "Dad, stop. You look appropriate. Dignified." Dignified. That was the goal. A dignified arrival, a dignified presence, and a dignified departure. Just endure the evening, for the sake of my children. The ceremony took place in a sun-drenched garden pavilion. I found a seat in the last row, offering polite nods to the familiar faces of old friends from my life with Roberta, her colleagues, and extended family. Some of them registered genuine surprise at my presence, while others studiously avoided my gaze. Up at the altar, Roberta stood, as stunning as ever in a tailored white dress, the afternoon light catching the silver threads in her hair. Our eyes connected for a fleeting moment across the crowded space. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and I returned the gesture. 25 years of shared history, distilled into a single, polite acknowledgement. The ceremony itself was mercifully short. Mark looked smug in his expensive suit, renewing his vows with booming declarations of eternal love. I watched my children standing beside them, integral parts of this new family portrait. The ache in my chest was a familiar old friend, not the searing pain of betrayal I'd felt a decade ago, but a dull, persistent reminder of all that had been lost. The reception was in the grand ballroom. I located my assigned table, strategically placed in a far-flung corner of the room, populated by distant cousins and business associates I barely recognized. It was another subtle message, reinforcing my new position in the family hierarchy. I was in the middle of some strained small talk with Roberta's elderly uncle when Mark materialized at our table, a champagne flute in his hand. "Arthur, so glad you could make it," he said, his smile a tight, practiced thing that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Roberta was worried you might not come. Wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied, my voice coated in a matching layer of false warmth. The ceremony was beautiful. Well, family is family, right? Even the complicated parts, he chuckled, placing a hand on my shoulder in a gesture of feigned camaraderie. Before I could formulate a response, he turned to address the others at the table. "For those of you who haven't had the pleasure of meeting Arthur, allow me to introduce him properly." He raised his voice just enough to capture the attention of the surrounding tables. "This is Arthur, Roberta's first husband." He paused for dramatic effect. "The past mistake, as we sometimes joke." The silence that fell over our corner of the ballroom was immediate and absolute. A few nervous coughs punctuated the dead air. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck as dozens of eyes swiveled in my direction. "Mark," Roberta's uncle whispered, his face a mask of mortification, but Mark just laughed, waving a dismissive hand as if he'd told a harmless, witty joke. "Oh, relax, everyone. We're all adults here. Arthur knows I'm just teasing. Don't you, Arthur?" In that moment, I felt something inside me fracture. A carefully constructed dam, holding back 15 years of repressed emotions, finally gave way. But years of practice had taught me the art of public composure. I forced a tight smile. "Of course," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Though I've always preferred to think of myself as more of a learning experience than a mistake." That drew a few genuine, appreciative chuckles. Mark's smile faltered for a second before he mumbled an excuse and moved on to another table. I remained frozen in my chair, his words, "the past mistake," reverberating in my mind. Was that how they talked about me in private? Was this the narrative my children were hearing about their father? "Don't you pay him any mind," Roberta's uncle said, patting my hand. That was appallingly rude. I nodded numbly, my gaze sweeping across the ballroom until I found Leo. The expression on his face confirmed he'd seen the whole thing. Beside him, Maya was staring intently at her shoes, her shoulders slumped in a posture of acute discomfort. Taking a slow, deep breath, I pushed my chair back and stood up. I wouldn't make a scene. I wouldn't give Mark the satisfaction. But I also refused to sit at this table all night like some forgotten museum piece. I had come for my children, I had shown my support, and now it was time to leave before I said something I would truly regret. As I made my way toward the exit, I passed the gift table. Beside a large, ornate guest book was a small stack of elegant cards and pens for guests who wanted to offer a toast later in the evening. On pure impulse, I picked one up. My hand seemed to move with a will of its own, the pen feeling heavy and potent. I may have been introduced as the past mistake tonight, but I was suddenly tired of letting other people write my story. Perhaps it was time to offer a toast of my own. The drive home from the country club was a blur of headlights and shadows. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. Mark's voice playing on a merciless loop in my head. The past mistake. The past mistake. By the time I turned onto my quiet suburban street, the tears I had been desperately holding back were finally streaming down my face. Inside my modest two-bedroom house, the one I'd bought after the divorce. I kicked off my dress shoes and sank onto the couch, not even bothering to flick on a lamp. The darkness felt like a fitting companion to the crushing weight in my chest. Past mistake. After 15 years of marriage, was that all I amounted to? After raising 2 children? After supporting Roberta as she built her corporate career from the ground up? I closed my eyes, and memories I had worked for years to keep buried came rushing back with the force of a tidal wave. Roberta and I had met in college. I was an art major, my head filled with dreams of one day opening my own gallery. She was a driven business student with her entire future mapped out in a series of 5-year plans. We were a classic case of opposites attract, drawn together by an undeniable chemistry. When she looked at me back then, I felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in my life. "You're different, Arthur," she told me on our 3rd date. "You see the world in colors I've never even noticed." We were married a year after graduation. I put my gallery ambitions on the back burner to support her through her MBA, working 2 jobs while she poured herself into her studies. It was only temporary, we agreed. My turn would come. Then Leo arrived, followed by Maya 2 years later, and my dreams naturally shifted to accommodate our growing family. I painted in the spare bedroom during nap times, slowly building a small portfolio in the stolen moments between soccer practices and PTA meetings. Roberta's career, meanwhile, skyrocketed. Vice President by 35, Senior VP by 40. We bought a bigger house in a more exclusive neighborhood. From the outside, we were the picture of success. My fingers found the business card in my pocket. AD Art Consultancy. My own modest venture, launched in the difficult years after the divorce. It had taken me so long to rebuild my confidence, to believe again that my artistic eye had value. The signs of our marriage's decay had been subtle at first. Roberta staying later and later at the office, the constant, secretive checking of her phone, the growing irritation in her voice whenever I mentioned applying for a curator position at the local art center. "Is this really the right time, Arthur?" she would say. Her tone clipped. "The kids need stability. My career is at a critical stage." My turn just never seemed to arrive. Then came the night of her firm's holiday party, 15 years into our marriage. The night I first met Mark. He was her new assistant, young, ambitious, and hanging on her every word with a look of pure adoration. I recognized the look in her eyes as she spoke to him. It was the same one she used to give me. Watching them interact that night, I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that our marriage was over. The confrontation came weeks later. A predictable storm of denial, then anger, and finally, blame. "If you hadn't been so preoccupied with your little art hobby, maybe I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere," she'd spat, the words like daggers. "A woman needs to feel supported, Arthur." The irony was so staggering, it left me speechless. I had spent 15 years supporting her, sacrificing my own ambitions for hers, and now she was blaming me for not being supportive enough. The divorce was swift and brutal. Roberta had the resources, the connections, and a carefully crafted narrative that people were all too willing to accept. The dedicated executive and mother, held back by a distracted, artsy husband who just didn't understand the pressures of her world. I was too shell-shocked to put up much of a fight. 6 months after the papers were finalized, she married Mark. Leo was 12, Maya just 10, old enough to be deeply hurt, and young enough to be thoroughly confused. Those first few years after the divorce were a nightmare. Roberta and Mark quickly established their home as the stable one, with its rigid schedules and catered meals, though Mark certainly wasn't the one cooking them. My smaller house, with art supplies often scattered across the dining room table, seemed chaotic by comparison. "Dad, why is there never any real food in the fridge?" Maya asked once. A question that felt like a punch to the gut. I found out later that Mark had been sending the kids home with care packages, gourmet snacks, and pre-made meals. A gesture of concern that served only to underscore my perceived inadequacies as a single father. Slowly, painfully, I found my footing. I started AD Art Consultancy, helping local businesses and homeowners select and display art. I made a few new friends, even dated a little, though nothing serious ever materialized. I learned how to co-parent with Roberta and Mark, swallowing my pride at school functions and holiday gatherings for the sake of Leo and Maya. The shrill ring of my phone jolted me back to the present. Leo's name glowed on the screen. "Dad, where are you? You just vanished." I cleared the lump from my throat. "I'm home, son. I wasn't feeling well." "Is this because of what Mark said?" "Mom is furious with him. She pulled him aside right after you left." "It's fine, Leo. I'm fine." I wasn't, not even close, but what was the point in admitting it? "It's not fine, Dad. It was cruel and embarrassing. Even Maya said so. And you know she never gets involved." A wave of gratitude for my children washed over me. Despite everything, they had grown into kind, compassionate adults. "Thanks for checking on me. Go enjoy the rest of the party." "All right. We'll talk tomorrow." After hanging up, I changed out of my suit and scrubbed my face in the bathroom. The man in the mirror looked exhausted and defeated. When had I become this person? The man who absorbs public humiliation with a polite, tight-lipped smile? The man who walks away instead of standing his ground? But as I looked closer, beneath the weariness, I saw something else flicker in my eyes. A spark of defiance I thought had been extinguished long ago. I walked into my small studio and flipped on the lights. Canvases in various stages of completion lined the walls. My art had evolved since the divorce, becoming bolder, more authentic. Unlike my marriage, my art had survived. On my desk lay a brochure for a prestigious art fair in New York. I'd been invited to submit a portfolio but had been hesitating, plagued by the familiar ghost of self-doubt. I picked it up, Mark's words still echoing in my ears. The past mistake. Maybe it was time to stop letting the past define my future. Maybe it was time to show Roberta, Mark, my children, and most importantly, myself, exactly who Arthur really was. I reached for the guest card I'd taken from the reception, staring at the words I'd scribbled in a moment of raw impulse. I didn't know if I'd have the courage to deliver this toast at Leo's upcoming graduation dinner, another event where both families would be forced to gather. But I knew one thing for sure. I was done being silenced. My phone buzzed again. A text from Maya. "You okay, Dad?" That was seriously not cool what Mark did. A small smile touched my lips as I typed my reply. "I'm better than okay. I'm finally waking up." The morning after the vow renewal, I woke with puffy eyes and a feeling of immense weight on my chest. I instinctively reached for my phone, squinting against the screen's glare. 3 missed calls from Leo, another text from Maya, and, to my surprise, a voicemail from Roberta. I ignored them all, shuffling into the kitchen to start the coffee maker. As the machine began its familiar gurgle, I gazed out the window at my small, tidy backyard. The garden I had planted last spring was in full bloom, a riot of vibrant dahlias and cheerful black-eyed Susans reaching for the morning sundae. At least something in my life was flourishing. The doorbell chimed just as I was pouring my first cup. A glance through the peephole revealed Leo, shifting his weight nervously on my front porch. I briefly considered not answering, but the sight of my car in the driveway was a dead giveaway. "Hey," he said when I opened the door. His eyes looked tired, and he'd swapped his groomsman's tuxedo for jeans and a university sweatshirt. I brought bagels. I stepped back to let him in, a part of me grateful for his presence, even as another part wanted to be left alone, to lick my wounds. "You didn't have to do that," I said, leading him toward the kitchen. "Actually, I kind of did." He set the paper bag on the counter and turned to face me, his expression serious. "What Mark did yesterday was horrible, Dad." And I just stood there and didn't say anything. I busied myself getting plates from the cupboard. "You were in an impossible situation, Leo." Mom yelled at him in the car on the way home. I've never seen her that angry. "She did?" I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "Well, that's something, I suppose. She said he crossed a line, that you didn't deserve that." A dry, mirthless laugh escaped my lips. How noble of her. Only about 10 years too late. Leo flinched, and I immediately felt a pang of regret. My issues with Roberta were not his to bear. "I'm sorry, son. I shouldn't have said that." I handed him a mug of coffee, and we steered the conversation toward safer waters. His graduate program, his roommate's chaotic new puppy. After Leo left, promising to bring Maya by later in the week, I sought refuge in my studio. Painting has always been my sanctuary, the one place I can process emotions that are too tangled and complex for words. I set up a fresh canvas and began to work, losing myself in broad, angry strokes of deep blues and turbulent purples, trying to exorcise the storm churning inside me. Hours later, my phone rang again. This time, it was my best friend, Dave. "I heard what happened," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "Liz was there. She called me this morning." Dave had been my rock during the divorce. While many of our mutual friends had felt compelled to choose sides and had mostly chosen Roberta's, he had remained fiercely loyal. "It was humiliating, Dave," I admitted, setting down my paintbrush. Just standing there while he called me his wife's past mistake in front of everyone we used to know. "That guy is a piece of work," Dave declared. "Always has been. The worst part is knowing that's probably how they talk about me all the time. What must the kids think, hearing stuff like that?" "Have you talked to Roberta?" I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "She left a voicemail. I haven't listened to it yet." "Well, at least call your kids back. They're worried about you." After we hung up, I finally steeled myself and played Roberta's message. "Arthur, I want to apologize for Mark's behavior last night. It was completely inappropriate and disrespectful. Please call me when you get a chance." Her tone was formal, clipped, and distant. This wasn't a genuine apology. It was damage control. The Roberta I had once known, the woman who would stay up all night with me to talk through a disagreement, who brought me coffee in the studio just because that woman was long gone. This Roberta was polished, controlled, and always mindful of appearances. The rest of the week was a blur of work appointments and long, sleepless nights. I had built a careful routine for myself in the years since the divorce, a life that functioned perfectly as long as I didn't look too closely at the empty spaces. Mark's words had sent a crack through that fragile foundation, forcing me to confront all the things I had quietly accepted. The subtle exclusions from family events, the way Roberta and Mark constantly rewrote our shared history, the gradual erosion of my place in my own children's lives. On Friday evening, Maya stopped by after her classes. Unlike Leo, who processes things through conversation, Maya has always been quieter, more observant. "You've been painting a lot," she noted, glancing at my paint-stained hands. "It helps me think," she nodded, wandering into my studio. She stood for a long moment before the canvas I'd been working on all week. a chaotic swirl of dark colors that was just beginning to show hints of gold and amber at the edges. "This is different from your usual stuff," she said. "I like it. It's how I feel," I explained, "like I'm emerging from something dark." Maya studied the painting for another moment. "Mark tried to get me to call him Dad once when I was 12, she said, her voice soft. "I told him I already had a dad. Mom said I was being difficult." The confession hit me like a physical blow. "You never told me that." She shrugged, her eyes still on the canvas. "I didn't want to hurt you any more than you already were. My sweet, protective daughter, always carrying burdens that were far too heavy for her young shoulders. Mom called me yesterday," she continued. "She wants us all to have dinner before Leo's graduation next week. You, me, Leo, her, and Mark." I felt my body stiffen. "And what did you say?" "I said I'd ask you. But honestly, Dad, I don't blame you if you say no." I looked at my daughter, so grown up now, with her mother's sharp features but a gentleness that Roberta had lost somewhere along the way. "I'll think about it," I promised. After Maya left, I returned to my painting, adding more strokes of gold, fighting back against the darkness on the canvas. Something was shifting inside me, a slow, deep, tectonic movement of resolve. For years, I had been the accommodating one, walking on eggshells, consistently placing my children's comfort above my own dignity. "The past mistake," I whispered to the empty studio, testing the words, like pressing on a deep bruise to see if it still ached. It did. But maybe that sharp pain was better than the dull numbness I'd been living with for so long. Maybe it was time to feel everything again, the anger, the grief, and yes, even the hope that had lain dormant for a decade. Sunday morning arrived with an unexpected burst of sunshine after days of dreary rain. I took it as a sign, a cosmic nudge to finally clean out my cluttered studio. Stacks of art history books, dozens of half-empty paint tubes, and years of accumulated creative chaos had become overwhelming. Tucked away in the back of a supply closet, I unearthed an old leather portfolio I hadn't opened since before the divorce. Inside were sketches from my college days, drawings filled with the raw, untamed possibility of a life that stretched before me like an unmarked canvas. These were from a time when my professors praised my unique perspective and untutored talent. Beneath the portfolio was a dusty cardboard box labeled simply, "Personal." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the lid. I knew exactly what was inside. The journals I had kept religiously throughout my marriage. I've always been a chronicler of my own life, finding a clarity in writing that often eluded me in conversation. I settled onto the floor, cross-legged, and opened the earliest journal, dated the year Roberta and I were married. The pages were filled with a young man's buoyant hope plans for our future, detailed dreams of the gallery I would one day open. I flipped forward through the years, watching my own handwriting evolve from a loose, enthusiastic script to something tighter, more controlled, more contained. An entry from when Leo was 2 caught my eye. Roberta was offered a junior partnership today. We celebrated with champagne after Leo was asleep. She says once she's more established, it will be my turn to focus on my art. I can wait a little longer. I kept reading, journal after journal, the progression of our story both fascinating and deeply painful. I found the entry from the night of the firm's holiday party, the night I'd first seen her with Mark. "Something's wrong. I can feel Roberta pulling away." Tonight, she barely looked at me, but I saw the way she looked at him, her new assistant. It's the same way she used to look at me. Am I just imagining things? Am I turning into one of those paranoid husbands? Then came the entries from the divorce. Raw, angry pages where the ink was blurred and blotted from my tears. I'd forgotten how visceral the pain had been, how completely and utterly lost I had felt. She says I never supported her career, that I was too absorbed in my hobby, a hobby, as if my art was just something to keep me busy between making dinner and doing laundry. Have I been living in a completely different marriage? Did I imagine the 15 years I spent putting her needs before my own? I closed the final journal, my hands trembling. I had buried these feelings so deep, convincing myself that accepting the situation with quiet grace was the mature, noble choice. But the man in these journals, he had fire. He had a righteous, roaring anger. What in the world had happened to him? The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. I had dimmed my own light, not just during the marriage, but for a decade after. I had passively accepted the narrative Roberta had so skillfully created, that I was the difficult one, the selfish one, the one who wasn't supportive enough. I had internalized Mark's subtle digs about my parenting, my career, my life choices. To avoid conflict, to keep the peace for my children, I had made myself small. I pulled out my phone and opened my calendar. The graduation dinner was scheduled for Friday, a celebration for Leo, with both families in attendance. In the past, I would have approached an event like this with a sense of dread, carefully monitoring my every word and action to avoid rocking the boat. Not this time. I spent the rest of the afternoon sorting through the journals, piecing together a timeline of my marriage that directly contradicted the story Roberta had been telling for years, the story I had allowed to stand unchallenged. By evening, I knew exactly what I had to do. The guest card from the vow renewal still sat on my desk, the impulsive toast I'd drafted staring back at me. I picked it up, rereading the words I'd written in that initial blaze of hurt and clarity. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. I took out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write again, this time from the heart, with no filter and no fear of judgment. This would be my truth, finally spoken aloud. Monday morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I dressed carefully for a meeting with a new client, a locally owned boutique hotel that was looking for original artwork reflecting the region's natural beauty. In the past, I would have been hesitant to present my own pieces, usually preferring to connect clients with other artists. But today felt different. The hotel owner, a woman in her 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, studied my portfolio with keen interest. "These landscapes, they have something special," she said, her finger lingering on a series I'd painted of the coastline. "They aren't just pretty pictures. There's a powerful emotion here." "Thank you," I said, surprised by the newfound confidence in my own voice. "I painted those right after my divorce. The ocean became a kind of metaphor for starting over." She looked up at me with new interest. "You know, we're creating a narrative for each room, a story to go with the artwork. Would you be willing to write something to accompany these pieces?" The old Arthur would have hesitated, worried about revealing too much of himself. Today I nodded without a moment's pause. I'd be honored. As I drove home, a feeling of lightness, of possibility, washed over me. The journals had reawakened something deep inside, not just anger at how I'd been treated, but a stark recognition of how I had actively participated in my own erasure. I had choices now. I could continue to play the role that had been assigned to me, or I could rewrite the entire script. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. Roberta's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Arthur," she said, her tone meticulously neutral. "Do you have a minute?" "I'm listening. About Friday's dinner. I just want to make sure things go smoothly. For Leo's sake." I heard the unspoken words loud and clear. "Please don't make a scene. Please don't embarrass us. Please be the quiet, accommodating ex-husband we've come to expect." "I'll be there," I said. "And don't worry, Roberta. I know exactly what I'm going to say." There was a beat of silence on her end. "Mark will apologize for his comment at the renewal. He knows he crossed a line. How generous of him." "Listen, Roberta, I have to go. I'll see you on Friday." I hung up before she could reply. The old me would have lingered on the line, seeking her approval, trying to smooth things over. The man I was becoming no longer needed her validation. Inside, I went straight to my studio and stood before the painting I'd been working on since the renewal. The dark, churning colors were giving way to veins of gold. It needed something more. I picked up a brush, dipped it in cadmium red, and added a single vibrant streak cutting through the darkness, bold, defiant, and unapologetic. That evening, as I revised my toast for the graduation dinner, a strange sense of calm settled over me. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about creating drama. It was about reclaiming my voice, my story, and my rightful place in the lives of my children. Mark had called me the past mistake. On Friday, I would finally show them all who Arthur really was, and always had been. The week leading up to Leo's graduation dinner was a whirlwind of client meetings and meticulous preparation. I had landed 2 new projects: the hotel commission and a local restaurant, looking to showcase regional artists. My work was finally gaining the kind of recognition I had only dreamed of, and the timing felt profoundly meaningful. On Thursday evening, I sat at my kitchen table with Dave, nursing a glass of wine while I rehearsed my toast, for what felt like the 100th time. "You're sure you want to do this?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "It's honest, man, but it's also a bomb." I carefully folded the paper and tucked it into the inner pocket of my jacket. "I'm sure. I have spent far too many years biting my tongue. What about Leo? It's his celebration." "I've thought a lot about that. This isn't about stealing his spotlight. It's about refusing to be erased anymore." I swirled the deep red liquid in my glass, watching it catch the light. My children deserve to know their father, the real me, not this watered-down apologetic version I've been performing for them. Dave nodded slowly, his expression serious. "Just be prepared. Roberta and that husband of hers won't take this lying down." "I know," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "But I'm not that frightened man anymore." After Dave left, I stood in front of my closet, trying to decide what to wear. I finally settled on a deep emerald green dress shirt I'd bought months ago, but had never had the courage to wear. It brought out the hazel flecks in my eyes and complemented the silver in my hair. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't choosing an outfit that would help me blend into the background. Just as I was hanging the shirt back up, my phone rang. Leo. "Hey, Dad. Everything okay?" "Everything's great, son. Just getting ready for tomorrow." "You haven't backed out, have you?" he asked, and I could hear the anxiety in his voice. I smiled at his concern. "Of course not. I wouldn't miss it for the world." "Good." He paused for a moment. "Mom called me today. She seemed worried about how things will go. Are you two fighting again?" "No, Leo. I think she's just feeling guilty about what happened at the renewal. Mark has been weird all week," he continued. "Super nice, but in that fake way, you know. He bought me this ridiculously expensive graduation gift, a watch from some fancy Swiss brand. It feels like he's trying way too hard." "Maybe he is," I said, sitting on the edge of my bed. "How are you feeling about all this?" "Excited, nervous. Mostly just glad it'll all be over soon." He laughed softly. "I'm really happy you'll be there, Dad. It just wouldn't be the same without you." After we hung up, I walked into my studio and stared at the painting. It was almost finished now. The darkness was still there, a foundational element, but it was now illuminated by streaks of brilliant gold and that one defiant ribbon of red. It felt like a perfect visual metaphor for my own journey, from suppression to self-reclamation. I picked up a fine brush and added a few final, delicate touches to the brightest section of the canvas. Tomorrow was going to be a turning point, not just for how other people saw me, but for how I saw myself. On Friday morning, I woke before sunrise, the residue of an anxiety dream clinging to me. In the dream, I'd been standing in a crowded room trying to speak, but no sound would come out. A classic anxiety dream, my therapist would have said, but on this particular day, it felt especially significant. I made a pot of strong coffee and took it out to my small patio, watching the sky slowly blush with shades of pink and gold. The journal I'd been rereading all week sat on the table beside me, open to an entry from just after the divorce. I feel invisible. At Maya's soccer game today, I sat alone on the bleachers while Roberta and Mark played the happy family in the front row. When did I become a spectator in my own life? When did I agree to this diminished role? I ran my fingers over the faded ink, the memory of that day still sharp. I remembered the way Maya had looked to them first when she scored a goal. My own presence, a mere afterthought. By the time I had showered and dressed, I felt centered and strangely calm. The emerald shirt and a dark gray suit fit perfectly. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the man looking back at me. He looked confident, poised, unapologetic. The graduation ceremony itself was beautiful. Leo, looking so handsome and serious in his cap and gown, accepted his master's degree in environmental science with a proud smile. I sat in the audience between Maya and Roberta's younger brother Julian, who had always made a point to remain friendly with me. Roberta and Mark were seated directly behind us, so close I could smell Mark's cloying, expensive cologne. He looked so happy, Julian whispered as Leo crossed the stage. He does, I agreed, blinking back tears of pure, unadulterated pride. After the ceremony, we all gathered in a reception hall for the obligatory photographs. The photographer, hired by Roberta and Mark, of course, arranged us in various groupings. Leo with his mother and Mark, Leo with me, Leo with both parents, Mark hovering awkwardly at the edge. Why don't we get one with everyone? Leo finally suggested. Dad, Mom, Mark, Maya, and Uncle Julian? I tensed, but moved into position, making sure to stand on the opposite side of the group from Roberta and Mark. As the photographer counted down, I felt Roberta's eyes on me. You look nice, Arthur, she said quietly, her voice carrying a note of surprise that might have stung me a week ago. Thank you, Roberta. I smiled for the camera, not bothering to return the compliment. The dinner reservation was for 7 o'clock at Leo's favorite restaurant, an upscale Italian place downtown. I arrived exactly on time to find the rest of the party already seated. Roberta and Mark were on one side of the long table, with Leo and Maya on the other, leaving 2 empty chairs. Dad, Leo waved, his face still glowing with a day's worth of accomplishment. You're here. I walked to the table, acutely aware that all eyes were on me. Mark's smile was fixed and brittle. Roberta looked wary. Only the genuine delight on my children's faces gave me the strength to move forward. Congratulations, graduate, I said, kissing Leo's cheek before taking my seat. I'm so incredibly proud of you. As I settled into my chair, I noticed a small stack of blank cards sitting next to Roberta's plate. Toast cards, identical to the ones from the vow renewal. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but I took a slow, calming breath. This time, I was prepared. This time, I would not be silenced. The waiter arrived to take our drink orders. I requested a glass of Cabernet, meeting Roberta's questioning gaze with a steady one of my own. Tonight was not about playing small. Tonight was about claiming my place at the table, both literally and figuratively. As the appetizers were served, I slipped a hand into my jacket pocket, my fingers brushing against the folded paper that held my prepared words. Soon I would have my say, and soon everyone at this table would know exactly who Arthur really was. Dinner progressed through a minefield of superficial pleasantries. Mark, as usual, dominated the conversation, holding forth about a celebratory vacation he and Roberta had planned for Leo, a trip to Italy that had been arranged without consulting me, or even considering that I might want to do something special for our son, too. "You'll love Florence, Leo," Mark gushed, gesturing expansively with his wine glass. "The art there is just magnificent." "Dad would know more about that than any of us," Maya interjected, glancing at me with a small, supportive smile. "He's the real artist in the family." Mark's smile tightened at the edges. "Of course, Arthur's hobby is quite charming." I took a slow sip of wine instead of rising to the bait, but I felt a warmth spread through my chest at my daughter's quiet defense. When the main courses arrived, Roberta tapped her wineglass with a spoon, calling for everyone's attention. "I'd like to propose a toast to our graduate," she announced, rising to her feet. She lifted her glass. "Leo, your father and I," she glanced briefly at Mark, "all of us are so incredibly proud of you. You have always been determined, focused, and brilliant. You get that from—" She faltered for a fraction of a second. "Well, from both sides of your family." It was the closest she had come to acknowledging my positive influence in years. I watched Leo's face, saw him beam up at his mother. "To Leo," Roberta concluded, "may your future be as bright as you are." We all raised our glasses, and Leo blushed with pleasure. "I have something to say too," Mark announced, standing up before the moment had a chance to settle. He pulled a familiar-looking card from his pocket. My stomach clenched. "Leo, I have watched you grow into an amazing young man over these past 10 years, he began, his voice dripping with syrupy sweetness. "While I came into your life when you were already on your way to becoming the person you are today, I do hope I've contributed in some small, positive way to your journey." I stared down at my plate, focusing on the simple act of breathing in and out. This was classic Mark, making himself the central character in a story where he was, at best, a supporting player. "I may not be your birth father," he continued, with a condescending glance in my direction, "but I have always tried to provide the kind of stability and guidance every young man needs." I felt Maya tense up beside me. Leo's proud smile had become fixed and unnatural, his eyes darting anxiously between Mark and me. "To our brilliant Leo," Mark concluded with a flourish, "we are so fortunate to have you in our lives." A polite, slightly strained round of applause followed. Roberta beamed at her husband, clearly relieved that he had managed to get through his toast without another major incident. The moment I had been preparing for all week had finally arrived. It was now or never. I stood up slowly, withdrew the folded paper from my pocket, and cleared my throat. "I'd like to say something too," I said, my voice resonating with a strength that surprised even me. Roberta's smile vanished. Mark's eyes narrowed into suspicious slits. My children watched me with a mixture of apprehension and morbid curiosity. "First, to Leo, my brilliant, wonderful son. Watching you walk across that stage today was one of the proudest moments of my entire life. Your determination, your compassion, your fierce intelligence, they inspire me every single day." Leo's eyes softened, a genuine smile returning to his face. I took a deep breath and continued, my gaze sweeping across the table. "Some of you might be surprised to hear me speak tonight. For many years I have been quiet, accommodating, careful not to make waves. I accepted being relegated to the background of my own children's lives because I honestly believed it was what was best for them. The table had fallen completely silent. I could feel Roberta's discomfort radiating across the table like heat, and Mark's growing alarm. "Recently," I said, letting the words hang in the air, "at a family function, I was introduced as the past mistake." I saw Mark flinch and noticed a few heads at nearby tables turn in our direction. It was humiliating, but it was also illuminating, because it forced me to realize just how much I have allowed other people to define who I am. I turned my attention directly to Leo and Maya. "Your mother and I made many mistakes in our marriage. The divorce was painful for all of us. But loving you, raising you, being your father, that has never been a mistake. That has been the single greatest privilege of my life." Leo's eyes were glistening with unshed tears. Maya reached over and squeezed my hand under the table. "I have spent too long hiding parts of myself, afraid that my full presence would somehow complicate your lives. I convinced myself that stepping aside, making myself smaller, was an act of love. But I see now that by diminishing myself, I denied you the chance to truly know your father, a man who is complex and creative and resilient, and yes, sometimes difficult." I glanced at Roberta, whose face had gone pale. "I will not apologize for taking up space in my children's lives. I will not apologize for having opinions and feelings and needs, and I will certainly never again apologize for refusing to be called a mistake, past or otherwise." Mark started to say something, but Roberta placed a warning hand on his arm, silencing him. "This isn't about revenge," I continued, my voice softening. "It's about truth. It's about teaching my children that they should never, ever make themselves small for anyone, not even for the people who claim to love them." I folded the paper and put it away, no longer needing the script. "Leo, as you step into this new and exciting chapter of your life, I want you to remember that you come from a long line of strong men. My father, who worked 2 jobs to give his family a better life. Me, a man who rebuilt his life from scratch after divorce and is finally pursuing the art career he once set aside. And you, already so much braver and wiser than I ever was at your age." I raised my glass high. "To Leo, and to the power of defining your own story." The silence that followed was deep and profound. Then Leo stood up, tears streaming freely down his face, and pulled me into a fierce hug. "I love you, Dad," he whispered. Maya was right behind him, wrapping her arms around both of us. "That was long overdue," she murmured into my shoulder. When I finally sat down, my legs feeling a little weak, I noticed several women at nearby tables nodding at me in quiet approval. Roberta looked utterly stunned, as if she were seeing me for the first time in 15 years. Mark was staring straight ahead, his jaw tight, his mouth a thin, hard line. The rest of the dinner was a blur. I was present, I was authentic, and for the first time in a decade, I wasn't constantly calculating my words or monitoring my expressions. As the evening wound down, I hugged my children goodbye, promising to meet them for brunch on Sunday. I was gathering my things to leave when Roberta approached me. "Arthur, can we talk for a minute?" she asked, gesturing toward a quiet corner near the front of the restaurant. I nodded, following her with a sense of composure that would have been unthinkable just 1 week ago. "That was quite a speech," she said when we were alone. "It wasn't a speech, Roberta. It was the truth." She ran a hand through her hair, a gesture so achingly familiar it momentarily transported me back to our early years together. "I never thought of you as a mistake, Arthur. You know that, right? Do I?" I studied her face, searching for the woman I had once loved beneath the polished corporate exterior. You stood by and let Mark marginalize me for 10 years. You participated in it. She had the grace to look ashamed. I was wrong. I took the path of least resistance. Yes, you did. I adjusted my jacket. But this isn't about you, Roberta. It's about me finally recognizing my own worth. The hotel commission. Leo mentioned it. That's fantastic, Arthur. You deserve it. The compliment sounded genuine, but it no longer carried the weight it once would have. I didn't need her approval to validate my success anymore. Thank you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should be going. As I turned to leave, she called out my name. Arthur, for what it's worth, I am so sorry. I paused at the door and looked back at her. I believe you are, I said. And that's a start. Outside, the cool night air felt clean and refreshing on my skin. I walked to my car with slow, deliberate steps, savoring the profound sense of liberation that was humming through my veins. My phone buzzed. A text from Maya. You were amazing tonight, Dad. So proud of you. A smile spread across my face as I typed my reply. Thank you, sweetheart. I'm proud of me too. Driving home, I thought about the journals. The record of a man who had slowly, imperceptibly, allowed himself to be diminished. Tonight, I had begun the process of reclaiming him, not with bitterness or melodrama, but with quiet dignity and unshakable truth. I sat in my car for a long moment after pulling into my driveway. The house I'd bought after the divorce had always felt like a symbol of my reduced circumstances, smaller, less impressive than the grand family home I had left behind. But tonight, for the very first time, I saw it differently. This house was mine. It was filled with my art, my books, the tangible evidence of a life I had rebuilt, entirely on my own terms. I went straight to my studio, switched on all the lights, and looked at my latest painting, the darkness giving way to gold and crimson. It wasn't quite finished. Tomorrow, I decided, I would add more light, more color. The darkness would always be there, a necessary part of the composition's depth and complexity, but it would no longer dominate the canvas. My phone buzzed again. It was Leo. That toast changed something. Mom and Mark had a huge fight in the car. I think you actually woke something up in her. I wasn't sure how to feel about that. For so long, I had measured my own worth by Roberta's regard for me. Not anymore. Whatever happened between her and Mark was their business. My business was to live as authentically and as fully as I possibly could. Get some rest. Graduate. I texted back. Tomorrow is a new day, and it was, for all of us. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.